A chunk of ice nearly as big as Shanghai may break off of Antarctica at any moment. The European Space Agency is using this satellite to monitor the Larsen C ice formation. A 200-kilometer-long crack in the sheet of ice has deepened and is ready to give way entirely, launching one of the biggest icebergs on record into the ocean. Researchers say it's a result of a changing climate that is altering the polar environments.
As you can see, the glacier no longer ends in the sea. Now we have beach. 20 or 30 years ago, those beaches did not exist. The glacier was falling directly to the sea. In other words, there has been a glacial retreat, probably a consequence of the climate change and the rise of temperature in this region.
The environment at the North and South Poles is changing rapidly and impacting the global climate. The world's polar ice caps are shrinking little by little. The Arctic is heating up twice as fast as the rest of the planet, with Greenland's glaciers receding particularly quickly. This process is speeding up. Melting snow exposes ice underneath, which then absorbs the sun's rays and leads to more thawing. At the opposite end of the Earth, 90% of the ice shelves on the Antarctic Peninsula are starting to disintegrate. Ice melt is also being observed in mountain ranges like the Himalayas, Kilimanjaro, the Alps, and the Pyrenees. In the Andes, glaciers are retreating and risk disappearing altogether. Ocean levels are rising due to the combination of melting ice and warmer sea temperatures, as warm water has a greater volume than cold water. At the current rate, scientists predict that by the year 2100, sea levels will rise between 26 centimeters and 1 meter. Islands in the Pacific or Indian Oceans like the Maldives will be submerged. Densely populated low-lying coastal areas like Bangladesh, Vietnam, the Netherlands, and the east coast of the United States are all under threat. A 2014 report from the Union of Concerned Scientists warns that within 30 years, Washington, D.C., here along the Potomac River, could see 300 flooding events a year due to rising sea levels, and the impact in other parts of the world could be much more severe. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
On Saturday, firefighters on California's Central Coast worked to protect dozens of evacuated homes from a fast-moving wildfire while searing temperatures scorched parts of the western U.S. The fire, which started Thursday, has now reportedly expanded to about 6,000 acres between San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties. It has since grown stronger due to high winds and bone-dry vegetation. On Saturday, it was reported that the fire was only 10% contained one day after authorities ordered between 150 and 200 houses to evacuate in Tempuesket Canyon. According to additional reports, the fire has not destroyed any houses or caused any major injuries.
CNN has reported that at least 15 people were killed and hundreds are still stranded after heavy rains triggered floods and landslides this week in southwest Japan. 12 people died in Fukuoka and 14 people are missing, according to Fukuoka Prefecture's disaster management website. It said 104,746 people remain under evacuation orders. 3 people have been killed and 47 people are unaccounted for in Oita Prefecture, where 40,033 people remain under evacuation orders. More than 7,800 rescuers from the Fukuoka Police Force and Japan's Self-Defense Forces have been working around the clock to search for missing people. But heavy rain Friday hampered their efforts, making rescue operations treacherous as they battled against thick mud and debris.
His wife and son both died, and his daughter was seriously ill. Usman Mohammed says the cause was not acute diarrhea, but a disease the government is refusing to confirm.
They were sick for only a day or two. We were told it was watery diarrhea. Why are they just calling it diarrhea? Many are getting infected and dying.
In the past 10 months, more than 300 deaths were reported and nearly 17,000 cases registered of what the government calls acute diarrhea. The local government in Khartoum says the infection came from refugees from neighboring South Sudan, where cholera cases have been confirmed, but they say it has been contained at the borders.
Not all cases are cholera. Those that have been confirmed have been contained at the borders, but because of the panic, everyone is now labeling any diarrhea case as cholera. But we test in labs and all results show it's E. coli and not cholera.
Economists estimate nearly half of the 40 million people in Sudan live below the poverty line. Many lack access to clean water and proper sanitation, which doctors say makes it easier for infection to spread. Despite the high number of infection, government leaders here say they aren't dangerous and shouldn't be feared. But young people especially are criticizing the government. They say the government should declare a cholera outbreak, something it doesn't seem ready to do. Some Sudanese fear infections could spiral out of control.
We go house to house to tell people how to avoid the disease, give them soap and chlorinate their water. We had 7 die in one day in one neighborhood alone from this diarrhea, and we don't want the numbers to rise.
Numbers that include members of Usman's family, and if the spread continues, possibly many more lives. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera, Khartoum.
The South Korean military said 2 U.S. supersonic bombers conducted live-fire drills on Saturday in South Korea in a show of force following North Korea's test launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile. The South's Air Force said the pair of B-1B Lancer strategic bombers flew from a U.S. base on Guam and were joined by U.S. and South Korean jet fighters to conduct the simulated destruction of an enemy ballistic missile launcher in underground facilities. North Korea announced on Tuesday it successfully test-launched an ICBM, saying the missile was capable of carrying a large and heavy nuclear warhead. Some experts believe the missile has the range to reach Alaska and Hawaii, and the test signaled a significant advance in the North's declared intent to build a nuclear-tipped missile that can hit the U.S. mainland.
An international mix of demonstrators peacefully protested on the streets of Hamburg on Saturday in a show of anti-capitalism as the G20 summit of the world's top leaders came to a close. Tens of thousands showed up Saturday in the northern German city to wave flags and posters displaying their support for a number of issues, including migrant rights, Kurdish independence, LGBT rights, and environmental initiatives. Julian G., who lives in a Hamburg suburb, told CNN he was demonstrating for the rights of Turkish people who've lost their freedoms under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's government. Activist Tianchi Martin Liao said he was calling for the release of Chinese political prisoners, including Nobel Peace Prize winner Liu Xiaobo.
As soon as the sun rises, Joyce Muthanya begins her journey across the arid plains to where she and her granddaughter collect water for the day. It's dirty, but there's no other option. The family would usually rely on maize for food and income, but the rains haven't come, so they've turned to this versatile crop instead.
In the past, we used to depend on maize in this area instead of sorghum, but now maize is not growing and we are looking to increase our sorghum production. It is doing better both for sale and for domestic consumption.
They've been helped by an aid organisation which promotes crops that tolerate drought.
We start with the farmer right from land preparation and various practices around the same to ensure that the farmer conserves as much moisture as possible at farm level. And employing practices like conservation agriculture so that not much water is lost at the farm.
But with 2.7 million Kenyans in need of food, many more need help.
It's a very, very serious situation in the Horn of Africa. You've got some 13 million people in 3 countries who are facing, the situation where they don't know where their next meal is coming from. So the drought is extremely intense.
People in Kenya, Somalia and Ethiopia are all suffering the effects of this drought, compounded by 2 years of below-average rainfall. It means those who, unlike Joyce, don't have access to resistant crops are suffering.
Those harvests have been lost, and that obviously affects food prices in the market. So the cereal prices go up, the livestock prices go down, and so people who have livestock as their resource aren't getting the money that they need from that, and then have a lot of trouble affording to buy any other kind of food because those prices have risen. So it's a really dangerous kind of mix of things.
Resources of every kind become more valuable by the day when you're at nature's mercy. Kim Vanel, TRT World.
Prior to Turkish President G20 summit arrival, Germany announced its refusal to let Erdogan address the Turkish community living there. Following bilateral talks with Tayyip Erdogan's German Chancellor, Angela Merkel stated their meetings revealed deep differences between the two nations. Ties between the two nations have recently soured due to several reasons. Among them, Germany's banning Turkish leaders from campaigning prior to referendum, and Turkey refusing to let German officials visit their troops at a Turkish airbase. But not all meetings were tense. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan also met with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. The main topic of their meeting, Syria. Despite being on opposing sides of the Syrian conflict, Putin praised Erdogan for his efforts to bring peace to the region.
Largely thanks to your position, Mr. President, we managed to dramatically improve the situation in Syria. A serious blow has been dealt to the terrorist groups in this period of time, and the regulation process has seriously moved forward.
Erdogan met with several other leaders, including UN Secretary General, Mexican President, Italian Prime Minister, and Japanese Prime Minister, and had brief talks with US President Donald Trump and British Prime Minister Theresa May. Speaking to the media at the end of the G20 summit, the Turkish president addressed key global issues like the refugee crisis and terrorism. In 2016, Turkey signed a refugee deal with the EU to alleviate the flow of migrants into Europe in return for financial support and visa-free travel for Turkish citizens within the Schengen zone. Erdogan called on EU leaders to hold up on their part of the deal.
Our spending for refugees has reached $30 billion. No country around the world has been hosting refugees in such a manner. While we're doing all of this, of the 3 to 6 billion euros that the European Union has promised, we have so far only received 800 million euros.
Erdogan also used his speech to reiterate Turkey's stance on national security, stating Ankara would not allow any terrorist group to settle along its borders and called for more cooperation in counter-terrorism efforts. Michal Bardavid, CGTN in southern Turkey.
Alberto Fujimori has 17 more years to go to complete his sentence. And these Peruvians want him to serve every last minute. They're angry at President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, who says it's time to talk about a pardon. 25 years ago, a death squad working during Fujimori's presidency killed Raida Condor's son Armando.
He has to complete his sentence. He's a murderer and a thief, and he is alive and my son is dead. He has to remain in jail.
We've lost our trust in the judiciary. We won't let Fujimori be pardoned because then all the politicians who are thieves will ask for a pardon.
Families of the victims say it took them decades to get justice, and they say they voted for Kuczynski because he promised he would not pardon Fujimori.
Fujimori is not terminally ill, a condition to be granted the presidential grace. But analysts say Kuczynski wants more influence in the Congress, which is led by Fujimori's daughter Keiko. She's opposed most of his initiatives and has managed to remove 3 ministers in less than a year. But Keiko Fujimori is also fighting her brother Kenji, who wants more influence over their political party.
Keiko is ready to stop her brother from planting obstacles in the way of the government, without conditions, because her brother, who's a legislator, is trying to gain allies within the party. He would also offer Kuczynski support in exchange for his father's pardon and gain power. Instead, Keiko's worried that if her father's released from prison, it'll be him and not her running for the presidency in 2021.
These protesters have no sympathy for Fujimori and little time for political infighting. They're the families of the victims of his government who have marched for decades in pursuit of justice. And they say they'll carry on demonstrating to stop his release. Mariana Sanchez, Al Jazeera, Lima, Peru.
Causing a stir among Trump critics on social media, Ivanka Trump briefly took the U.S. president's place at a meeting with other world leaders at the G20 summit in Hamburg on Saturday. Ivanka is President Trump's daughter and one of his top White House aides. A photo of the first daughter sitting next to Chinese President Xi Jinping, British Prime Minister Theresa May, Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel was first tweeted by Svetlana Lukash. She identifies herself on Twitter as G20 Russian Sherpa, a title given to people who help international delegations at large summits. A senior Trump administration official confirmed that Ivanka Trump had stepped in for her father. The official dismissed any suggestion it was improper or unusual.
A few dozen Ku Klux Klan members and supporters shouted "White Power" at a rally Saturday in Charlottesville, Virginia. They protested against a city council decision to remove a statue honoring Confederate General Robert E. Lee. The group was guarded by scores of police and outnumbered by hundreds of counter-protesters who waved signs denouncing racism. Confederacy statues and flags have been removed from public spaces across the United States since 2015, after a white supremacist murdered 9 black parishioners at a South Carolina church.
A man wearing a bulletproof vest and armed with knives was arrested at Trump Tower in New York City. ABC News reports 52-year-old Sixto Benitez Adames was arrested July 6 and taken to a medical center for a psychiatric evaluation. Benitez Adames told Secret Service agents at Trump Tower he was a U.S. senator and that he owned Trump Tower. He then asked if U.S. President Donald Trump's daughter and advisor Ivanka Trump was in the building. According to police, Benitez said he wanted to discuss her clothing line. Police also found a fake ID on him as well as a sock with a heavy metal object in it. He was then arrested and charged with criminal possession of a weapon and 1 count of possession of a forged instrument. Ivanka is currently in Europe with the president as he attends the G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany. For United News International, I'm Milet Uni.
Xi Jinping said supporting Africa's development will boost a balanced and inclusive world economic growth. He said China is a sincere partner of Africa and supports its development through concrete projects with no political strings attached. He added that Africa's affairs and its path should be independently decided by its own people. On digital development, President Xi Jinping proposed G20 members build a growth and employment-friendly digital. He said members should actively adapt to digital evolution and foster new economic drives. They should also advance structural reforms and promote integrated development of the digital and real economy. President Xi Jinping also called for sincere and cooperative cyberspace with inclusive trade rules.
A respected coffee farmer in Hawaii was forced to leave the island and his family when he was deported Friday. The Department of Homeland Security rejected Andres Magana Ortiz's lawyer's petition to grant him legal status because he is married to a U.S. citizen. Ortiz voluntarily left Hawaii to return to Mexico, where he said he no longer has family. The 43-year-old was smuggled into the U.S. when he was 15 so he could join his mother. He later started his own coffee farm in Hawaii's Kona region, becoming a well-respected member of his community. According to President Donald Trump, China is the linchpin to solving North Korea's saber-rattling with missile tests. But his strategy with the Asian superpower has been all over the map. He's thanked the Chinese for their support, argued they aren't helping defuse the situation, then written them off as willing partners. All this in the span of a few months. In Germany, for the G20 on Saturday, Trump urged action on North Korea as he met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Trump argued ominously during the brief public portion of his meeting with Xi, something has to be done about it. Trump said there will eventually be a success against Pyongyang. He added, it may be longer than I like, more than you like, but there will be a success, one way or the other.
The MDA says the test will involve a ballistic missile target and will be conducted at a Pacific Spaceport Complex in Kodiak, Alaska. According to the agency, THAAD, which stands for Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, will detect, track and engage a target with an interceptor rocket in early July. Such exercises are usually planned months in advance. On Tuesday, the DPRK successfully testified an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of hitting parts of the U.S., including the state of Alaska.
State news agency Xinhua said Chinese President Xi Jinping urged Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on Saturday to put aside distractions that have strained bilateral ties and warned that China was unwilling to compromise on Taiwan. Relations have been complicated for decades by the legacy of Japan's wartime aggression. Self-ruled Taiwan, which is claimed by China, was governed by Japan from 1895 to 1945 in another sensitive issue, and a maritime territorial dispute over small islands in the East China Sea has deepened mutual suspicion in recent years. Beijing complained to Tokyo in March after a Japanese minister visited Taiwan. China has also told Japan not to get involved in the dispute over the South China Sea.